Hi everyone, V-Day Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and today I thought I would take a look at something a bit different from last week. So last time we looked at a very sharp game. Certainly a game where calculation was very important. In this game, certainly calculation plays a role, but it's much more a game where strategic thinking, where thinking in terms of schemes is very important, and having plans is really what makes the difference, rather than calculating a lot of particular variations. Though, as we'll see, there are a few places where calculation was important, and in fact may have made the difference between a win and a draw. So this is an old game, and not a very flashy game. I mean, it's the sort of game that is easily forgotten, but I think it's very instructive. So this was played between Nowak, I'm not sure how strong a player he was, and Ludek Pacman, who was a very strong Czech grandmaster, who was flourishing, I think, in the 50s, 60s, and even into the early 70s. It was played in Solingen in 1968, and the first part of the game is extremely nondescript, so we're going to go to the place where the endgame that we're after begins. So this is the position we're going to start from. Queens have just been exchanged. It's white's move here. And this is the kind of position where club players might just agree to a draw, frankly, or at least I've seen games like this end just more or less with a quick handshake. So material is even. There are no obvious weaknesses for either player. I mean, white has the pawn on g2 that's a minuscule target, but there are various ways that white can very easily deal with that. And I mean, I can think of games a lot like this, where I've had young students, for example, who were playing up 100 points, and they realized that maybe they were a little bit better, but they thought, all right, well, my opponent's 100 points higher rated, so I'll just agree to a draw here. And, it's a mistake. The position is, I think, still objectively drawn, but black has actually a number of little advantages that can add up to something big if white doesn't play with some degree of accuracy. Now, you might want to try to figure out, before we get going with the rest of the game here, what exactly it is that makes black's position better, or what cluster of points is in black's favor, and then come up with some medium-term plans as well. So, take your time, try to figure something out there, and then let's see what happened in the game. All right, well, this is actually an interesting moment here. I think white maybe missed a small chance to really minimize his disadvantage. So, okay, let's talk about things that are in black's favor. So first of all, black has this queenside majority. Now, there's nothing magic about it being a queenside majority. I mean, if you sort of inverted the board from left to right, then white would have a queenside majority, right? So it isn't that by itself. But the reason why a queenside majority is sometimes referred to in this context, where it's meant obviously to be something favorable, is that here it would function as an outside majority, or that black could try to acquire an outside passed pawn. And the advantage of an outside passed pawn is that it serves as a diversion. So if the main body of the pawns at the end of the day is going to be on the king side, but black has this one solitary extra queenside pawn, you can use that to tie white's forces down on that side of the board, and then go and try to collect over on the other side. So that's the advantage of having this queenside majority. The second point is that it's going to be quite a bit easier for black to create a passed pawn than it is for white, thanks in part to the fact that there are these doubled pawns, but also because in some way it's much harder for white to really advance the pawns to create this passer. So that's another very small advantage in black's favor. Still, another small advantage is this white pawn on g2, which is maybe a little bit of a target, and perhaps there are various ways in which white can try to fix it, but some of them will create other minor weaknesses in the process. And then finally, I think we'll see that black gets a little extra space. That his king, for example, can achieve its fourth rank more easily than white's king can achieve its fourth rank. Okay, well, again, all of this shouldn't really amount to enough to create a winning position, but it's the sort of thing that certainly merits playing the game out for black, and to do so not just to go through the motions, but with a real eye towards possibly collecting the point if white is at all careless. Now here already I think white misses a little chance. He should probably play g4. And the idea of this would be to play g3 and take care of that. This pawn could go to g5 if necessary. And in that case, there wouldn't be any problem with his kingside pawns. There would be no little weakness tying him down. He would have certainly his fair share of space as well. And that would, I think, make his job a bit easier. In the game, he played bishop to e2, okay, which doesn't really hurt anything yet. Black plays king f8. Again, I think g4 would be better, but he played f3, and this, I think, is definitely a little inaccuracy. Because now, after bishop to d5, hitting the pawn, a3, which is the right way. You don't want to play b3, because then putting all these pawns on light squares creates more problems. So after b3, ideas like a5, a4 become a real worry. So a3 is right. Okay, but now f5. And now all of a sudden, okay, there's not going to be any e4 or g4, or at least it won't happen without coming as a serious concession. And now we have two pawns stuck on light squares. And additionally, the white kingside majority is now stymied. It's not going forward. So there's not going to be any passed pawn. And even if white did create a passer with something like bishop d3 and e4, it'll end up being this sick isolated pawn on e4, rather than some useful pawn that will in any way tie black down. So already black has made some progress here. Okay, here if white, for instance, wanted to play f4, trying to fix this, so to get that guy out of the way and then to play bishop to f3, against this, black can probably solidify his advantage with h5, so stopping g4, that was another point. And then on bishop to f3, I think trading would be bad. So after this exchange, white can play e4, and he'll end up with a protected passed e-pawn. It's not going to win, but it'll prevent the black strategy of creating an outside passer on the queen side from really having any great use. I think so. Although there might be some interesting ideas with g5 and h4, but nevertheless, I think that black shouldn't have any serious advantage here. If black were to retreat the bishop, well then e4 and life should be pretty decent for white. So the right way, I think, here is bishop to e4. And now the exchange would be just very bad for white. Black would bring his king up to f5 and g4, and then start pushing the queenside pawns, and that would easily win. So here this is not so pleasant. I mean, in fact, what we have already after bishop to e4 is kind of a de facto king and pawn ending, because this bishop can't move without hanging the g-pawn. I mean, unless white's king is going to sit on g1 or f2 forever. So black will simply bring his king up, start pushing these pawns, create a passer, and white's king will have to come over to the queen side as well. But the point is then, these guys are at a standoff. And it looks like this is much better, maybe winning for black. Certainly very much to his advantage. So f4 is not really a successful way of dealing with this problem with his pawns on the light squares on the king side. Okay, so in the game, Nowak just played king f2 and brought his king over to the queen side. Now, here perhaps black makes an inaccuracy, although it's a very natural one, and it worked perfectly in the game. So he played c4. So perhaps he should have made some other constructive move, maybe bishop to c6, maybe g5 or h6. But this, while again very, very natural, is perhaps inaccurate. And the point comes after king c3, king c5. Now, here we have a very, very important moment in the game. I don't know if this is the losing moment for white, but it's definitely a place where things go wrong for him. Okay, well, what should he do? Black's idea is very clear. He wants to play b5, a5, b4 check, and then having done that, we'll see what comes next. But that's the immediate short-term plan for black. Now, how can white combat this? If he plays a4, then a6. And now here white can try b4 check. So this would be an attempt to throw a little monkey wrench in the plans. B takes a6. Sorry, c takes b3, and then bishop takes a6. Now, here, the idea for black is, well, he's got to do something, because otherwise white's just going to round up this pawn with bishop b2 and bishop to d1. So the idea is to play b2. Okay, and now we can look at a couple of ideas here. One is for white to play bishop to d3, so trying to keep the black king at bay. If this, then bishop to c4, bishop to c2, and now bishop to f1. And certainly black is making some progress. I don't know if it's a win for black yet or not, but certainly he still has decent winning chances. Okay, so bishop to d3 is possible. Maybe keeps the game going. If king takes b2, here king to b4, bishop to d3, and I have some not very good old notes from Reshevsky in his book, I think. What's it called? The Art of Positional Play. So he covers this game, but not very well. His analysis isn't so good in general. It's light. It's just meant as kind of a casual book. And here, for instance, he gives the following line. So he says after bishop to d3 that bishop to c4 wins. And he's right, except that it wins for white. So bishop to c4 is just a horrible blunder. White just trades and plays e4, and black can resign. So black doesn't have time to go after this guy because e5, and then he can solidify with f4 if the black king comes back, and if the black king takes, well, the pawn just queens. And on the other hand, if black goes for the e pawn, then he just loses, just king b5, king b6, and in comes the a pawn way before black can do anything on the king side. Okay, so that's a really bad bit of analysis there by a great player. Instead of this, black should just take, but now I think just e4 is okay for white. So white's only a little bit worse here. So it looks as if playing a4 gives white still some chances. I mean, black can't just win so straightforwardly, can't just run him over. Okay, but it's actually even worse than this. Alright, instead of a4, which isn't so bad, white has bishop takes c4, which is a trick that's actually known from an old two knights variation in a kind of a similar context. So the canal variation of the two knights, there's a line where you get to this bishop and knight ending, both sides have a bishop and a knight, and white does this the same trick. Okay, so the point here is that after bishop takes c4, b4 check, whichever way the black king goes, there's a pawn check that drives him away from the bishop. And black can go either way, but in either case it's going to be a draw. So, for instance, a king to b5, a4, takes. Okay, now here a5 would be a blunder, b5 probably just wins, the e-pawn just runs home. So we've got to play b5 check, king c5, and now a5. Okay, takes, e4, and black queens first, but white queens second, and there's no way for black to really exploit this. So this is simply going to be a draw. So for instance, b4, king c4, fe, and it's a draw. Okay, so let's go back here, and instead of going to b5, let's look at king to d5. So now e4 check, takes, king e4, king c4, and again, white is actually fairly quick. So 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, and then the pawns go. So either the a pawn, or you move the king and push the b pawn, and it's going to take black longer. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you need 5 moves for this to happen. So at the very least, white is okay in that race. So black should probably play a6 here. Okay, then a4 with the idea of a5 to create a hole on c5 for the white king. And on king e5, a5, takes, king d6, and now forced move for white, g4. So he needs to make sure that he doesn't get out-tempoed here, and this position is equal as well. Okay, so it looks like bishop takes c4 just forces a draw. Just, purely tactical line, taking advantage of the fact that the black king can't keep control over c4 for very long. All right, so that's why c4 is premature. Black needed to find some way of preparing this beforehand. Okay, well in the game though, white did not realize that he had these neat possibilities and played bishop to d1, and now he's in big trouble, possibly losing already. And again, this seems a little surprising. I mean, it doesn't really look like his position should be that bad, but black's plan is really quite natural from here. So the first part we already know. We don't have to stop and think about this bit too much. Okay, but now we need to come up with a new plan. So we've achieved everything we can on the queen side for the moment, and here we need a new idea. So what do? Can the king penetrate on the queen side? Can we get the king to b3? Well, not really likely. I mean, once the king, let's say black were to play king to b5. All right, I'm assuming there's no good ideas with b3, but anyway, you can just play bishop to e2 and bishop to d1 and keep him at bay over there. So that's not really going to be any problem. Well, what else can we do? d3 and then king to b4 with the idea of maybe c3 and then king a3. That could be interesting. The only problem is that after b3, white parks the king on c3, so black doesn't get to achieve that. So in some way or other, we're going to have to use the king side. But this seems kind of strange at first, because after all, white's got the majority over there, and it would seem that pushing pawns would only help white to create a passed pawn or in some other way to benefit. But in fact, there is a way that we can use this. Now, first good rule of thumb is that we like to fix pawns on light squares. So, well, we'll see this in action here. Okay, so let's look at a couple more moves. Bishop c6, bishop e2, bishop a4 is just kind of tacking around at this point. And now bishop f1. Just to mention some other ideas for white, just to show that there are a variety of ways in which he can lose. First of all, bishop to d1 is just clearly bad. But this is worth looking at just to illustrate the basic outside passed pawn point. So on this, black should throw in this check just to gain a tempo. Takes, king c1. We swap. King c4, king c2. And if the white king retreats, then the king just comes in and starts gobbling up everything in sight. So we just have to run white out of moves. h5, and he's already pretty much out. The only move he's got now is f4. Okay, that's enough for the moment, but black can just play this. King to b4. Okay, white has to stick around here in front of the pawn. And now it's a fatal zugzwang. And even if it's not zugzwang, it doesn't matter. The black king now has access to the white king side and can devour everything. Okay, so that's why white just cannot afford to exchange the bishops. Okay, well, let's look at another idea. Well, what if he plays e4? Well, this is simple too. Takes, king d4, bishop f3, and just bishop to c6. So this passed e-pawn is going to be a passed away e-pawn. It's just too weak. It can't survive. So that's not a good plan. White cannot get counterplay in this position. Okay, another try might be f4, aiming again to go for, let's say, bishop f3 and e4, or maybe sometimes g4. Okay, against this, black plays bishop to c6, taking aim at this weakie over here on g2, bishop to f3, and, okay, now h5. Alright, so that stops g4, and e4 has been prevented as well. Again, black does not have to fear in the least white's exchanging bishops. We already see how black wins in that case. Here it might be even easier. After the exchange, the black king just parks on e4 and then plays c3. So that's not going to be of any use. And, well, if white can't do that, then he's got to retreat, or he's got to move his king. So let's say king c2. Okay, check. Again, taking is of no use because white cannot create a passed pawn on the king side, so this is going to be routine as well. Now the black king will come in over here and then create a passer, and then bring the king over to the king side. So after bishop to e4 check, again the king has to move. And now after king to d5, white is in Zugzwang. If the bishop retreats, bishop takes g2. If bishop takes e4, king e4 is a trivially easy win. And if the king moves anywhere, then black plays c3, and he makes further progress at that point. Okay, so this is, I think, a good illustration of all the problems that are really befalling white at this point. So he can't do anything active, and he can't trade bishops, so he's just got to mark time here, which he does with bishop to f1. Now, as I mentioned, we'd like to fix these white pawns on light squares. So g5 is a first start to that. But actually, there's a further point to it, which we'll see. So bishop to e2, h6, bishop f1, bishop c6, putting the bishop on a good diagonal, but in fact, he's actually not sure just yet what he's going to do. So, and he's not hurting anything. Okay, now bishop to b5. Now this is a nice little point too. This forces a bit of a concession from white, because the threat is to play c3 check, just picking up the bishop. And in fact, white can't afford to go into the king and pawn ending either, so he plays king c2, getting out of the way of the check. But now this actually favors black in a way, which we'll see in a few moments. So h5, bishop e2, h4, takes. Okay, so this is still not winning for black, but it's very useful for him to have done this. Why? Well, two things. So first of all, he's fixing these white pawns on light squares, which is really excellent for him. Why? Well, these pawns are stuck here as potential targets. So if they can't run away, they can be attacked by the black bishop. Now you could say, well, okay, fine, but I can defend them with the light square bishop. And that's true, but the bishop is going to be very, very passive on f1. So black's bishop could perhaps do more than one thing at a time. It can put pressure on these pawns while simultaneously perhaps contributing to the fight over on the queen side. So that's a plus. Secondly, by having this pawn on h4 and having it so far advanced, it means that in cases where there might be a race, where, let's say, the black king is rushing over to the king side, the pawn is quite far advanced, and so it's going to give him a head start. Also, there can be positions where there are tricks like bishop c6, bishop takes f3, and the pawn promotes. So, again, it may not happen, but it's quite useful to have this tactical possibility just be available. Just its existence is one more thing that white has to worry about. Okay, so these are some of the pluses, but still, black isn't, well, black has a winning advantage, but black isn't winning the game yet. In other words, there's still work to be done. Okay, well, at this point, white played bishop to f1, just continuing to mark time. Bishop to d1 is probably a better move. Okay, and we'll come back to this in a moment. But he played bishop to f1. All right, so now, again, black has made a lot of progress. He's achieved his, the most he can on the queen side. The pawn on h4 is very good. But what's the winning idea? How does black finally convert all these nice little advantages into a full point on the scoreboard? The answer is f4. So this is the winning move here. And this is also part of the reason why black wanted to force the white king away from d2. Okay, so again, if king d2 here, then there's c3 check. So e takes, f4 is more or less forced. And now, okay, he played bishop to d7, stop f5, and to swing the bishop to a new good diagonal. King d2, king d4. Okay, and this is the reason why f4 is important. So now the king is penetrated, c3 is coming, and then the black king is going to penetrate the white king side, collect everything, and that h-pawn is going to make the difference. It's going to promote. Okay, so bishop to e2, c3, takes, king c1, bishop f5, so cutting off the white king from being able to attack the pawn on c3, bishop to b5, and now, here we go, king e3, king f2. Yeah, we don't have the f4 pawn, you could take it, but there's not really any reason to, and in fact it would even be a mistake, because after king takes g2, the diagonal is closed, that long diagonal is closed. Whereas if this guy is gone, he could play f4 check, and at least cover it. So there's no reason to take this pawn. It's not harming anything. Well, it's harming white, but it's not harming anything that black wants to do. So after bishop to e4, he just takes and plays king g2, and they would queen simultaneously if it were in check, but it is, so they don't. So black is going to queen with check, and so white resigned here. Now let's go back a little bit to the position where white played bishop to f1. So he could have put up better resistance with bishop to d1. And the point is that now if f4, e takes f4, king to d4, king to d2. White has this. And after c3, can trade and play king e1. So this time the bishops wouldn't have been exchanged. The bishop was not sitting on f1 ready to be taken. And the bishop on d1 is covering c2, so the pawn's not promoting. And white's idea is just to leave the bishop over here where he can sack it for the pawn if it ever gets to c2, and then just play like this and get rid of the h-pawn and draw. So I think white holds. I'm not 100% positive about this, but I think white does save the game. Maybe king e3, but then f5, and then this guy starts to run, and this isn't going to be trivial either. So I think you have to play bishop to d3, but now king f2, taking away the e3 square, and okay, if bishop to h7, trying to put white in Zugzwang, then king to e2. And I think white holds. So bishop to d1 would have been better. I don't think it draws, though, because I think black can engage in a little finesse first. So king to d5, bishop e2, king to e5, let's say king to b1, just again a temporizing move, because if he plays king to d2, again there's c3 check. Anyway, the idea now, after king to b1 or c1, is to play f4. And after, let's say, e4, I mean, if you take, then just king f4, king g3 is winning. So e4, and now king to d4. And again, there's that royal road. That's why you put all the pawns on dark squares. Or one of the reasons why you put all of your pawns, if you're black, on dark squares. These guys are stuck on light squares, so they can't help the bishop. So all the dark squares now belong to black. The king comes in, and he still wins. So it looks as if white's failing to find that neat little tactical idea quite a while back. I mean, this was all the way back over here. So when white allowed b5 and didn't play this bishop takes c4 idea, or at least a4, from that point on it seems that he's losing. So after bishop d1, b5, he's at least in huge trouble. So I think this is a very instructive ending, and we see the power of the queenside majority, or you can think of it as, again, the power of an outside passed pawn or an outside majority. And you also got to see the strength or the problem for the weaker side when he ends up getting his pawns fixed on the same color square as his bishop. So this white king side, rather than being a strength by virtue of being a majority, ended up just being kind of a piñata, and it takes black a while to kind of take enough swings to break it up and then collect all the goodies. But sooner or later, that's what's going to happen. So white failed to make his majority useful. He wasn't able to fight for space. I mean, that was another big problem. Just that little extra bit of space that black had proved to be enough to win the game. And so that's also part of the reason why bishop takes c4 is very important. It gives white just enough space to be able to survive. So again, I think this was a very instructive ending, and one that I think bears replaying from time to time, just to see all of these really useful themes in action. All right, so hope you found it instructive, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.